How are your parts? This week's been a little challenging for me and my parts. And those critics come up and they're doing the best they can, but they're parts that react to them. And so I've just noticed those polarizations. And so it's good to take time for me to remind my parts that I'm older now, things are different, but they can trust a little more. But it makes sense that they're struggling with that. And maybe you're noticing some of those polarizations and inner struggles, and just be gentle with yourself and just pause, send compassion to those parts. We're all doing the best that we can, and we all have times where it's more challenging than others. So let's begin with a question I've been reflecting on recently. How can you better understand and feel the experiences of your parts? And one's by just awareness and knowing that no matter how much we practice this parts work, it's good to reattune and increase that awareness and pause and slow a little bit. You've heard me talk over the last couple episodes about my feeling overwhelmed with work, family, responsibilities, and my own inner expectations. And those critics have high expectations. And you've heard me talk about my part that's often driving me to work harder to be productive, no matter the cost. I had a therapist once who I went into their office, and often, little Tim shows up, and the parts that are protecting him think one mistake, and you've heard me say this, that you don't belong where you are today, and one mistake, you're going to show it to the world. And it sticks in my mind, and maybe it's helpful for you as I tell my parts when they can really be stirred up and not be working as a team. Those parts that once helped me, and they're still trying to help me, but reminding them things are different, to have a conversation and let them know that I'm not going back. I'm going to keep making mistakes, but everyone's making mistakes, and we're enough. There's a team here, and this helps them soften to remember who I am. And to remember that there are powers at work outside of who I am, and they can trust. And I'm sure some of you can relate. I'm sure, all of you can relate on some level, whether it's work, personal goals, or just the pressure to keep up. We all have parts that push us to keep moving forward. Parts that don't like them, we don't have to push them away. They're doing the best they can. We can extend some compassion. But what happens when we don't slow down to really listen to these parts, and that we're not offering empathy to these parts that are critical, doing the best they can? We still need them, but they don't have to work so hard. They make us whole in who we are today. And the same with those parts that react to the idea of slowing down and giving these critical parts or overdriving parts space. They're doing the best that they can too, and their fears are valid. But they've got who we are today that's driving the bus. We can get to know each of them. And both sides bring gifts that we need that make us self and whole in who we are. But in my lack of slowing and noticing and reacting to my taskmaster type parts without understanding where they're coming from and noticing how my other parts react to them, I get exhausted. But I'm not taking the time to truly feel what that part of me was experiencing and why it was so relentless. And it didn't know how it was affecting my system. It doesn't want to put me off balance. And when I decided to sit with it, and I'm not going to lie, it's not comfortable. There are parts of me that don't even know much about feelings because it wasn't appropriate in the past. But they're learning. They're having courage little by little. Parts of me didn't want to face the deeper fears and worries, and they still don't. That this part that is overworking and being a taskmaster was carrying. But I needed to pause, as hard as it was, as much courage as it took from my parts. And as I sat with the overworking parts, I began to see that these parts weren't just about productivity for productivity's sake. They're carrying fear of failure, of not being enough, of letting my family down. if I didn't keep up. And when I acknowledged that, something shifted and continues to shift. And the part that didn't like the taskmaster softened too. These parts that seem so polarized are beginning and have begun to realize that they're actually working on the same team. And that we can go heal those little Tims together. Instead of pushing back or trying to fix, having empathy for my parts, just like I do for clients and others, goes a long way. And so I encourage you to say to your parts, I see you, I hear you, and I understand, or I want to understand why you're so anxious. In that moment, I found that profound things happen and tension is eased. And my overworking critical parts are relieved to know that they don't have to work so hard anymore. They can trust me and soften back if they feel seen and heard.